Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, I am sharing my thoughts on some more movies. And this time around, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on four different Yu-Gi-Oh films. So, initially, John requested me to share my thoughts on this Yu-Gi-Oh! The movie, which is also known as Pyramid of Light. But I honestly have taken a pretty extended amount of time getting to this request. So I decided to go one step further and share my thoughts on the other three Yu Gi Oh! Films as well. So that's why this is now not just a review of Yu Gi Oh! The movie, it's also a video where I am going to be discussing my thoughts on all of the Yu Gi Oh! movies. And to John specifically, I want to apologize for such a long delay. I hope this video is worth the wait. And if there is another topic, film, or TV show that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal, my Patreon, or my Cash App. Links to all three are going to be in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your requests as soon as I possibly can. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is one of those things that I definitely know about because I know that some of my friends or some of my classmates when I was a kid, they definitely were fans of the show, Duel Monsters, or, they played the card game. It was never really my thing, though. And I probably would say I watched more episodes of Pokemon than I ever did Yu-Gi-Oh! But even then, I still wasn't like some die-hard Pokemon fan. I had Pokemon cards, but I never really played the game. I just had them because it was a very popular fad, and I was trying to fit in. I'm pretty sure if Yu-Gi-Oh was even more popular than it was at the time, like if it surpassed Pokemon in popularity, or it was like as big as Pokemon was, I probably would have had Yu-Gi-Oh cards too. But it was just never really something that spoke to me in the same way that it does for other people. Because I know a lot of people have a lot of nostalgia and a lot of fond memories of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! The card game with friends when they were growing up or watching the anime. I'm not really one of those folks, so this is really the perspective of a total Yu-Gi-Oh! Novice when it comes to my opinions of these movies. And I honestly enjoyed all of these. Like, I'm not going to say that I thought they were great, and I thought that they were all equally as good, but there wasn't a single Yu-Gi-Oh movie that I saw out of these four that I thought was bad or particularly poor. In fact, I enjoyed them enough that I want to check out Duel Monsters. I want to check out the original first series of Yu-Gi-Oh seasons that really popularized Yu-Gi-Oh in America, because I do like these characters, and I did like the dynamic and the interactions that they had with each other, and while I do have some issues with some of the dialogue and some of other things involving just the way that combat happened in these movies and how repetitive it was at points, I still, for the most part, was entertained. Now, the first Yu-Gi-Oh movie is kind of not a movie, which is another interesting thing about these Yu-Gi-Oh films, is that only two of them are feature length. Uh, the first one is like only like 30 something minutes, and then the third one is only like an hour, and it's even less than that if you take out like the intro, which is just filling you in on the different Yu-Gi-Oh shows that this special is going to be combining together into one big like Avengers style crossover. But they're still technically listed as movies and films on the Yu-Gi-Oh Wikia, so I'm gonna cover them. So the first Yu-Gi-Oh movie, it's called Yu-Gi-Oh the movie, which makes things very confusing because of the fact that Pyramid of Light, when it had a theatrical release in the United States and got released on video, was called Yu-Gi-Oh the movie. So there's technically two Yu-Gi-Oh the movies, which is very befuddling, but it makes sense when you know the context. The first Yu-Gi-Oh movie, it was produced by Toei Animation, and it's based on the animated series, the anime that they also produced, because Toei actually produced the first Yu-Gi-Oh anime. And this was, I think it was supposed to take place after the last episode of the Toei anime, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it was supposed to take place after episode 27. It marks the end of the Toei anime in general. So this is supposed to be the big finale, so to speak. And for a while, this was very hard to come by and very hard to find, especially if you were in the US, because I think it only got a Laserdisc release in Japan and it was pretty rare. But somebody eventually tracked down a copy. They used the Domesday Replicator, which is a piece of tech that can rip Laserdiscs in very high quality formats. And they then uploaded it on YouTube with fan created English subs. And that actually isn't the version that I watched, though. I watched a fan dub, a fan English dub of this. I'm actually going to link the dub in the video description because honestly, I think it's worth checking out. Because the fans just did a really great job recreating the voiceover and the overall, style of the later series, Duel Monsters. So I think it really makes for, a fun companion piece to the other Yu-Gi-Oh films because they carry over a lot of the same, type of voice acting and voice performances. Also, you could tell that it was a labor of love by these fans. They were legitimately fans of Yu-Gi-Oh. Like they really loved the show and they wanted to do something fun with the Toei anime and, they did it with this and then did it with some of the other Toei anime episodes. I don't think they've completed the entire Toei show yet, but I would love to see them do fan dubs of the entire Toei anime series because they capture the comedy and just the overall fun vibe of the later series very well. And, I actually think they do a good job with the voice acting too. So, yeah, I would say this was still my least favorite out of the four Yu-Gi-Oh films, but that's only because of the fact that it's really just another episode of the Toei show, but with a little bit more high quality animation. And it's not really a movie. Like I don't call a film that's like 30 minutes a movie. Like I just think that's a little much. Also, the plot was just easily the least interesting out of all of the Yu-Gi-Oh films that I saw. It mainly focuses on Shogu, who is this very timid, shy kid who doesn't really want to duel, doesn't really want to get involved in conflicts, is not confident in himself, and this is even the case after he obtains a rare card called Red Eye's Black Dragon. Even though he has this rare card, that isn't very powerful and should provide him with some added confidence. He just doesn't have it in him. So that makes him a target for Seto Kaiba, who's essentially Yu-Gi-Oh's a main a rival in the series, and he decides to organize a tournament. And Shogu and Yugi Muto, who's the kid who unlocked the Millennium Puzzle and brought the Pharaoh to life, and then the Pharaoh, takes over his body at times and helps him, win these card battles. Yugi Muto and Shugo, they get chased down and they get a little roughed up by Kaiba's henchmen from Kaiba Corp. And they wind up stealing Yugi's Millennium Puzzle. So, of course, in order to get the puzzle back, Yugi has to enter Seto Kaiba's tournament. And so that's definitely some pretty big stakes there because Yugi needs the Millennium Puzzle. Now, this is also kind of a little bit of an origin at points because it kind of... Well, actually, no, I don't think it shows, like, how Yugi, found the puzzle and put it back together. That's actually Yu-Gi-Oh! The movie that does that. The other Yu-Gi-Oh! The movie. This is just more of, like, an episode of the show, really. And Yugi enters Kaiba's tournament, and he's doing it to also show that Shogu, he has the potential and the ability to become a duelist himself. He just has to believe in himself, and eventually, Yugi does get to be able to use the Red Eyes Black Dragon in a climactic, pretty epic moment at the end of this film, when Yugi, gets the upper hand and defeats Seto Kaiba. And overall, it's okay. It's fine. It's serviceable. It's decent enough. The animation quality, I think, is pretty solid. The direction by Junji Shimizu is strong enough. So it's like the plot for what it is, but like I also think it's a little lacking in some ways. I don't really care for the Shogu character a lot and the way that he's written. It just kind of, one of those characters. It seems like he's a wet blanket, so to speak. I was more into like Joey, and Yugi and Yugi's friends and so on, and Seto Kaiba is kind of a, I don't know, like he's a villain and a rival that, when it comes to a good chunk of these movies, he's just kind of derivative, but he's still a character that grew on me. Because when you get to Dark Side of Dimensions, which is the final Yu-Gi-Oh movie as of now, the character actually becomes rather compelling and interesting. But before that point, this is kind of a derivative, generic, rival archetype, so to speak. But it's fine. It's a good introduction to Yu-Gi-Oh and the card game and everything. But I do think that if you already played the game and you already had watched the Duel Monsters anime series, you definitely get a little bit more out of it. If you're like just a newcomer, just a newbie coming in watching this, there are some points that you might be a little lost and maybe going like, huh? Like what? But I was able to get the gist enough of what was going on in order to, get the plot and everything. So, and get somewhat invested in it. So Yeah, I would say this is basically only something I would recommend watching if you're just some diehard Yu-Gi-Oh fan, and if that is the case, you've already seen it probably multiple times. But maybe uh, it's more of a recommendation for new fans who are starting to get into Yu-Gi-Oh, like what they've seen when it comes to maybe Yu-Gi-Oh the movie, a Pyramid of Light, or from the Duel Monsters series, and then they're like, okay, let's see a little bit more, and then this could be something that you could put on. So the second Yu-Gi-Oh movie is called Yu-Gi-Oh the movie, and it actually had a theatrical release. It came out in 2004, and it made a bit of a profit. It made 29 million on a $20 million budget. I don't know how much of that was from the Japanese box office though, or the overseas box office total. So it wasn't like it was a smash hit theatrically, but it probably made a bit of a profit. And it's directed by Hatsuki Tozuji, and I think he did a pretty terrific job directing this. I definitely feel it has a theatrical size and scope to it in terms of the way that he framed his shots or used the camera within the realms of animation. Worked around the limitations as well as the multiple advantages that animation has as a format in comparison to shooting a live action. And I think there is a little bit of CGI, but it's not set up in a way where it's too much of a detriment to the film or like a distraction. I think that the animation quality is pretty admirable. I think it looks pretty good. The film effectively captures the style and the look of the show that was running at the time that was popular, while giving it a little bit of a touch up. And yeah, I definitely think it is a relatively well directed animated film. I think a lot of the bits that do feature some sort of tension or feature something that's supposed to be a moment of grand spectacle definitely do have that feel and that overall vibe to them. And I think good reason why I think this is at least an adequate average film is in a lot of ways due to how the director handled things, and how the writing handled the best moments of the overall plot. But I have to admit, like, I just thought this was pretty much kind of a little bit on the same level as the previous Yu-Gi-Oh movie. uh, I would say that if I had to pick between the two, I would pick this over the 1999 Yu-Gi-Oh movie, but that's not saying a whole lot. Because the only reason why I'd pick it is because this has higher highs than that one did, but it has similar lows, or in some ways is worse, especially when it comes to the pacing. Like, it's not that long of a movie, but it really does drag a bit too much at times. The screenplay is by Michael Purcello and Norman J. Grossfield, and the opening I don't mind because it's a good a way to provide a quick little origin story, like a refresher course for people who aren't super familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh. So you get a little introduction that shows, what happened with the Pharaoh Atem, and when he imprisoned Anubis, the Lord of the Dead, and you get a little bit with Yugi and him, discovering the Millennium item. I think one of the many Millennium items, but the Millennium Puzzle. So he discovers the Millennium Puzzle and puts it together, and that's when the Pharaoh winds up coming to life, and has this bond with Yugi. And you have some stuff with these archaeologists who uncover Anubis's tomb, and they find the Pyramid of Light, and this is also a bit of the origin because at the same time, Yugi puts the puzzle together and winds up releasing all these monsters and creates the bond between him and Pharaoh Atem. And then, flashes forward to 3 years later. The Battle City finals have concluded, and, Yugi is champion. He defeated Saito Kaiba, and he now has these three Egyptian god cards. And this enrages Kaiba because Kaiba is a sore loser. And a lot of the same issues I had with Kaiba when it comes to like his brief inclusion in, well, not brief inclusion, because he really is the main rival and the main antagonist in the 1999 Yu-Gi-Oh movie. But due to, my first impressions of him, he really didn't seem like he was that strong of a villain. And it's the same sort of thing here. He's just a sore loser who just happens to have all this money and influence. It's like, okay, all right, dude, get over it. You lost. Like, big deal. But I will admit, I still didn't mind some of the stuff with Kaiba in this, especially when he ultimately winds up challenging Pegasus to a duel. Once you got to the whole thing with Pegasus and Kaiba dueling, I really got more into the plot because Pegasus is just written as a saucy baddie, and I love it. He's just so funny and over the top and in a really fun way. I mean, he has like a nightmare one night. He wakes up and he's like, "That's it. No more white wine spritzers before bed." Like, it just cracked me up. I just thought he was a hoot. And I like the fact that, he had a different style of monsters or combatants that he used in battle because he has these tunes. And so the battle between him and Kaiba was a nice change of pace because, have these different tunes that he's using in combat. And it also showed that Kaiba is a very formidable foe because he actually does defeat Pegasus fair and square. And he gets Pegasus' rare card because he heard that Pegasus, had a card that he could use to maybe defeat Yugi. And I like that it's switching things up there, and it also really does establish Kaiba as a very viable threat because of the fact that he, beats him fair and square without any computer enhancements or any of this other stuff, just beats him in a battle of cards. And you then have some stuff with Yugi and Taya and Joey and Tristan, and I like the dynamic between these characters. I think it's a lot of fun and they have really good chemistry. But a problem I do have with this plot is that a good chunk of this movie has them apart from each other. Because what happens is Kaiba, once he beats Pegasus, he decides to challenge Yugi to another duel. He corners him, essentially. He corners him and forces him to duel with him. And it's because he wants to humiliate Yugi. He wants to destroy him once and for all and get his Egyptian god cards. And he'll do that at any cost. And what happens is this starts just a really long extended duel between Yugi and Kaiba, and it's really long in the tooth, and it's kind of boring after a certain point. Initially, it's not too bad, but the longer it goes on, the more tedious it becomes. And the only real enjoyment I got out of this portion of the plot was when it would go away from the battle, which is kind of funny because it's a battle. So you think it would be really exciting and thrilling, but it honestly isn't after a certain point in time. So I was more interested in what happens when he winds up drawing the Pyramid of Light card. And it creates this pyramid of light that forms around Kaiba and Yugi. And The pyramid itself, it starts taking people's life force. So it sucks out the soul of Joey, traps it inside of the pyramid, does the same thing with Yugi. So then I think it's just the Pharaoh who's fighting Kaiba at that point in time. And this is also something that is potentially deadly for both combatants in this duel, because each time they lose a life point, they actually lose their life, because their life essence and energy is also being sucked into the pyramid of light, along with anybody who winds up staring into the eye of Anubis. Because of the fact that this entire pyramid is just a construct that's built to feed Anubis people's life force, so Anubis can be resurrected. And this leads to Yugi and Joey, who are trapped inside of the puzzle, the Millennium Puzzle. Because I actually don't think they get trapped inside the pyramid; they get trapped in the puzzle itself. And somehow it's also connected to the pyramid, which is then taking the people's life force. And Yugi and Joey, and eventually Taya, who decides to essentially sacrifice her soul to wind up helping her friends. Uh, Tristan's also in there too, along with Joey, by the way. And so all of them have to team up to find a way to stop Anubis. And once they do team up, it's a lot of fun, especially when they're fighting mummies. I wish there was more of that in the plot. And I do like the design of the interior of the Millennium Puzzle. It looks like something out of the movie Labyrinth, which I thought was cool. But I do think that there could have been a little bit more variety in terms of the different sort of things, or illusions, or different paths that they would have to take in order to get out of the puzzle. And eventually, Anubis does get resurrected despite the best efforts of Yugi and his friends. So it's up to Yugi to defeat him. I think, yeah, I think Kaiba. Yeah, Kaiba also helps in his own way, and this gives Yugi an upper hand to be able to defeat Anubis in combat. Because Anubis, I guess apparently he just wants to play things fair, which I always thought was kind of funny. It's like, oh, he spent all these centuries, not just decades, centuries waiting to be resurrected, and you get resurrected, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna put the the whole potential of me staying resurrected and fulfilling my dark prophecy on a card game. It just, it is kind of funny when you think about it. But ultimately good triumphs over evil, and that's Yu-Gi-Oh the movie. The plot's not super complex, but it does throw in some nice fun little twists here and there. But I definitely feel that it is a little boring at points, and I do think there could have been more going on besides just the duels. I get why the duels are so abundant and why they're such a main focus when it comes to the plot, because it's Yu-Gi-Oh the movie. But I just felt like you could have had a little bit more on top of that, since it's a movie and you had like $20 million to work with when it comes to the budget. But that's just me. I did like the voice cast. I watched the English dub, by the way. I think Dan Green did a great job as Yugi, and as Yami. You have Eric Stewart, who was a bit stiff at times as Kaiba, but that's just kind of how he plays the character. And honestly, I blame the dialogue more, because some of the dialogue, that Kaiba has to say in this is kind of lame. There's no way around it. I mean, it doesn't sound very natural the way that he's talking during some of these duels. Anubis is voiced by Scott Rayao. And he wasn't remarkable, but he was fine enough. Wayne Grayson, who voices Joey, I really like. He's like got like a Brooklyn, New York kind of accent, and he's definitely got a similar kind of attitude to him as your average New Yorker. And I liked his voice acting quite a bit actually. Greg Abbey was fine too as Tristan, his friend. Amy Birnbaum was really good as Taya when she was actually given any screen time. And the rest of the cast was fine too. I definitely want to mention Darren Dunstan as Pegasus. He stole every scene that he was in. And overall, like, I enjoyed it for what it was. It was, okay, kind of a fun watch. I would say at most though it's a time waster for me because of the slow parts, in the middle. But yeah, I mean, I would say, if you want to watch, a fun, rainy day kind of anime movie, you could definitely do a lot worse than this. Now, the third Yu-Gi-Oh film is called Yu-Gi-Oh! 3D Bonds Beyond Time. I didn't watch this in 3D because I don't even know if it even had a 3D release on home video. I think it was only theatrically, um, and I think only in Japan. Because this was maybe in the UK. This definitely was not something that I think had much of a theatrical release in the US. I don't even know if it had one at all. Um, and this came out in 2011 in the United States. It came out in Japan in 2010, and this is the other Yu-Gi-Oh movie that is technically not what I would consider to be a movie, but I'm going to cover it here anyway because it's only like an hour long, and it was produced to essentially be a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the Yu-Gi-Oh series. And it's a team up film. That's really basically all that it is. It winds up teaming up various different protagonists from other Yu-Gi-Oh shows. So you have Yu-Gi-Oh 5D, and you have Yu-Gi-Oh GX, and Yu-Gi-Oh, and it's one of those things where I think you would definitely get a lot more out of it, and it would be more epic if you watched any of these other shows. But I still think you can get some enjoyment and some fun out of it, even if you're like coming into it blind, because it's got some cool monster battles, and it's just a fun idea as well to just combine all these different Yu-Gi-Oh protagonists into one plot. So it's directed by Kenji Takashita, and I think the direction is fine. It's definitely not a feature film kind of thing, even though it says that it is, but it's really just more of like a bit of fan service for fans, for the 10th anniversary. And the direction is solid, for what it is in terms of the framing and the way that he works with the camera and works with the animation as a whole. The screenplay, the stories by Kazuki Takahashi, and it's essentially one of those like apocalyptic future storylines. One of these storylines where all their timelines are getting destroyed or in the process of being eliminated because of the actions of the antagonist. And the antagonist in this is somebody named Paradox. And, he's creating a paradox, because of all the things that he's doing. Because of the fact that he's from a future where Duel Monsters, the game, basically destroyed the world. So he doesn't want that to happen. So he decides to do it in the most extreme way possible by, preventing Duel Monsters from ever existing as a card game. And so this is something that's affecting all of these different Yu-Gi-Oh timelines. So you have Yu-Gi-Oh 5D, and you have Yu-Gi-Oh GX, and you have Yu-Gi-Oh. And it starts out weird, though, I have to admit. Like, you start out with the first 10 minutes are just this rundown of what each series is, and who the protagonists are, and who the characters are, and basically just a noob retelling of these origins of all of these shows that are featured in this crossover. And I'm like, I appreciated it as a noob, but if I wasn't, I would find it to be kind of annoying, especially as a celebration of the 10th anniversary of the show. But once you get past that, it gets better, but it still starts off in an awkward way because you have this whole thing with Paradox and this dragon that's attacking a particular timeline, and then you go to one of these timelines very early on in the plot, so that just reveals the twist. Like, you already know where they're going to go, what timeline they're going to go to next, and what's going on and who the bad guy is. It was just a really dumb choice, in my opinion, when it comes to the story. Like, why would you do that? It literally just, as soon as you see Paradox for the first time, now you're like, okay, that's a bad guy. It was just waiting for the rest of the Yu-Gi-Oh characters to catch up to it. It was just a weird, awkward storytelling choice. So you have, Yu-Gi-Oh 5D, which has Yusei, and then you have Yu-Gi-Oh GX, which has Jaden, and then you got Yu-Gi-Oh Present, which is the Yu-Gi-Oh show that, Yu-Gi-Oh the movie is a part of, with Yugi's timeline. And that's really what Paradox is trying to get to, because that's how he's going to stop the future from happening. Because his whole plan is to kill Pegasus. So then the card game's never created. Kill Pegasus before the card game is debuted, so then he doesn't have to worry about the card game becoming this massively popular, successful game that ultimately destroys the world later. This whole thing, though, I'm kind of like, okay, why are we supposed to be against Paradox? Like, okay, yeah, the whole thing with the card games is cool, and the battles are cool, and the monsters are cool, and there's a lot of ingenuity and imagination with the different types of monsters and the different things going on in combat. But if it ends up destroying the world in the end, then Paradox is kind of right. But he's set up as like he's wrong and he needs to be stopped. And I get it, because that, if he's not stopped, then their timeline ceases to exist. But if, the future is actually the future that Paradox comes from, then, that's kind of a big deal. I mean, those dual monsters are cool, but eventually causes the apocalypse. So maybe not cool enough. But anyway, it's essentially, for like half the plot is just, hey, here's Yu-Gi-Oh 5D, and here's their encounter with Paradox, and then here's them like escaping from their timeline before it gets erased. Here's Yu-Gi-Oh GX, and then here's Jaden and Yusei teaming up, and here's what's going on with Yu-Gi-Oh GX and their timeline and everything that's happening there. And then they then wind up in Yu-Gi-Oh Present, and then they team up with Yugi, and then it culminates in a battle between all three of them and Paradox, where they eventually use their combined card battling talents to topple Paradox and save their timelines. And it's pretty predictable in that regard, but it's still fun just to see the crossover and to see the three of them together in one battle. Yugi, Yusei, and Jaden. And I liked Paradox's design, and I thought the way that he utilized his combat mechanics was cool. And overall, like, it was fun, fun to watch, for what it is, a little crossover thing. Um, but definitely flawed, and ultimately kind of just okay. If this was the last Yu-Gi-Oh movie, that could be a little bit of a letdown, really, because, like, oh, we had this fan service crossover, but, like, it didn't seem like there was a ton of thought put into it beyond, like, how are we gonna get these three together to have one uh big card battle with the villain. So yeah, I mean, it's watchable, and I would say you probably get even more out of it if you saw the other Yu-Gi-Oh shows that it's having a crossover with. But even then, I think you still get some fun out of it for the monster designs and the way the battle ultimately unfolds in the end. But yeah, I'm not gonna say that it's like some kind of gem or it's great. Now, the final Yu-Gi-Oh movie is Yu-Gi-Oh! The Dark Side of Dimensions, and this one came out in 2016. And this is my favorite of the Yu-Gi-Oh movies. And what's crazy is this is a Yu-Gi-Oh film that is also the longest. Like, this is a Yu-Gi-Oh film that's like over 2 hours, but I didn't really feel that it felt that long because I really got invested in the plot. And in a lot of ways, you can look at this as a genuine send off to Duel Monsters. Like, this is like their last hurrah. This is like the finale. And it's also, got some other characters from other, uh, versions of the Yu-Gi-Oh show, but this is definitely something that's really trying to be more of a send off to that particular take on Yu-Gi-Oh and that series, because it culminates with Yugi and his friends graduating from high school and going their separate ways. And this is where Kaiba, I think, is at his best when it comes to the way that he's written as a character. Definitely at his most compelling and interesting. And I honestly really like a lot of the other stuff, that is uh, uh, showcased in this plot. Like, I really like, Agami. I like the Quantum Cube. I like the Plana. So the Dark Side of Dimensions, it came out in the U.S. in 2017, but it had a release in other countries in the world in 2016, and it's directed by Satoshi Kuwabara. I thought he did a spectacular job directing this. This is honestly the best direction out of all of the Yu-Gi-Oh films. And I don't think the direction was bad in the other Yu-Gi-Oh movies either, but this is just a step above in terms of the way that he used the camera angles, the way that he showcased the battles, the way that he really just was able to create such an immersive and just a genuinely great animated film to just sit down and watch. Like, it's a really uh, well put together, well utilized, and well done animated film in pretty much every way. Like, I just think it's just really impressive. I think it looks incredible. I think the animation is really amazing. I think it does a good job in terms of updating, the style of Yu-Gi-Oh, but not really losing a lot of the charm that it has. And it's just a really epic looking movie. Like, if I had actually watched the other anime shows, the other Yu-Gi-Oh shows before I saw this, like, I definitely think, this would be one of those things where I would be like, man, like, this is awesome. Uh, and I think a good reason why is due to how it's directed. It's just got some really dynamic and really great direction. The story by Kazuki Takahashi, I also really like. I like the opening with the space station with Saito Kaiba and him uh, putting together the Millennium Puzzle uh, with this computer program, and then him also utilizing this new souped up dual disc that he's created that enables him to beat the Pharaoh. And I think because of the fact that this is like so far down the line when it comes to the continuity of this particular part of Yu-Gi-Oh! And the Yu-Gi-Oh! Story and the mythos, Kaiba being this obsessed and, going to such extreme lengths to defeat the Pharaoh, it just feels more fitting because the Pharaoh's no longer there. So his desperation just feels all the more palpable. Where before, it's like, dude, get over it. But here it's like, okay, he lost the last battle with the Pharaoh and with Yugi. And, that's sticking with him because of the fact that, he wasn't able to have another chance. Because in his mind, if I just had one more chance, I could have beat him. I could have beat him finally. And that eats away at him and it makes him more desperate. It makes him more unhinged. And I definitely feel that that is represented very well in this screenplay. And then you have this other stuff going on with this excavation that happens that uncovers a Millennium Puzzle. And Yugi and his friends, they're in their last year of high school. And so you have a little bit of stuff with them, trying to get to school on time. And I thought that was pretty fun and charming. And you eventually have this other character that's introduced in the fray named Agami. And everyone acts like they know him, but they don't quite understand why. And you eventually find out that he's this mysterious character who was a part of this group called the Plana, who uses this quantum cube to be able to send people into this dimension. And the Plana are a very powerful group of people who have this ability to potentially remake the world into this beautiful place. And they were only given this power because of the fact that the Pharaoh wound up leaving Earth. So when the Pharaoh leaves Earth, or he goes back, into the afterlife, the Plana are given this power. But because of the fact that they will lose the power if the Pharaoh comes back at any point in time, Agami is now corrupted and he's become desperate and he wants, similar to Kaiba, and he wants to kill Yuki so then the Pharaoh can never return. But in the process, this hate that's building inside of him, it's really causing a conflict between him and other members of the Plana, including his sister. And so his sister actually winds up helping Yugi and turns against Agami to hopefully, delay the hate from truly taking over Agami in the end. And I think there's a lot more with Taya and Tristan and Joey and a lot of these other characters, and they're just a lot of fun together, and so you get more of that in this story than you did in the other Yu-Gi-Oh movies. You have this other side plot going on with the Plana, which is interesting and unique in its own way. You have the drama of Kaiba wanting to bring back the Pharaoh so we could finally beat him because he has the technology now to do it. And you have Yugi who's missing the Pharaoh. He misses the Pharaoh's friendship. He misses the Pharaoh being there. He wants to say goodbye one last time. And so there's a lot of finality that it's building up to when it comes to the plot and the script. And I think for some people, like, maybe it's a little too complicated, a little too much going on, and I can kind of agree with that. There's some stuff with the Plana that could have been cut down a little bit, and there's some other things here and there that could have been, streamlined more. But overall, like I think it definitely adds a lot to it. And Kaiba, he's got the Millennium Puzzle, but there's two pieces missing, so now it sets up a duel where Kaiba allows Yugi to battle Agami in a duel in order, for Yugi to get the other piece, because he has the one piece that Sarah, Agami's sister, gave him, and now he's got to get the other piece. And I like how Agami, he has this dimension dueling style of battling, which is very different and unique in the way that he utilizes his battle schemes and his combatants. And I think, the whole finale, in Kaiba's tournament is honestly really epic and really cool. And I think, the stakes are very high. Not just because of the whole fact, you got the whole thing with the Pharaoh and everything, and Yugi and the battle with Agami, and where Agami's trying to kill Yugi, because in a dimension battle, you lose your life points, you use your life for real, and Yugi eventually finds a way to beat Agami, and then it sets up a duel between Yugi and Kaiba, and it eventually leads to a draw between the two, which I could see why some people are a little disappointed with that. But I mean, Yugi's defeated Kaiba countless times already, so it being a draw, I think, is a little bit different than what you normally see. But it's also, I don't think it's the first time they've gone to a draw either. But I really like the scene where Yugi winds up putting the missing pieces into the puzzle, and the Pharaoh doesn't come. And the realization of that settling in, and the reality of it, and the fact that Yugi was right all along, that the Pharaoh went away, and Sato just didn't want to believe it, and he refused to believe it because he's just obsessed with defeating the Pharaoh. It's like his only lot in life, because it's the only time he's ever lost anything. And so I really like that part of the finale. And then I also really like how it eventually leads to Agami Agami eventually mutating into this Millennium Ring monster, because Millennium Ring is something that can really corrupt people's souls. And that's why there's this whole connection with this character named Bakura, who was friends with Yugi and his other friends. And Bakura, his dad tried to get the Millennium Ring all these years ago and got corrupted by it and died. And then Bakura actually got corrupted by it at one point. And so that's also why Agami is really trying to target Bakura. And that's the reason why Yugi's in the duel with Agami at the end as well. Not just to do the whole thing with Saito and prevent him from, potentially hurting the Pharaoh and killing him, but also to save his friend Bakura. Because initially Joey was trapped in there into this dark dimension, but Joey found a way out. But Bakura is still trapped. So, because Yugi will do anything for his friends, he's willing to, potentially lose his life over saving Bakura in a battle with Agami. And eventually, he does defeat Agami, and he gets into the duel with Saito Kaiba, and they reach an impasse, and then Agami winds up coming out from this other dimension with the cube, and now he's been fully consumed by his hate, and the Millennium Ring has used that to turn him into this monster. And then, in Yu-Gi-Oh fashion, the monster has a duel, with Yugi. But this time, Kaiba teams up with him. And it gets to the point where the monster is going to kill one of them. And Kaiba sacrifices himself for Yugi. And I thought that was a really cool moment, and definitely a nice moment to showcase something else about Kaiba, to show that, he's not necessarily, just a straight up evil, sociopathic, rich asshole. Like, there's something more to him than just that. And there's more depth to his character. I thought it was a great moment in the film and in the plot. And eventually, Yugi, he's doing his best, but he just can't really get the upper hand. And it looks like all is going to be for naught until the Pharaoh has a triumphant return. And it's a pretty epic moment. I will admit, though, it was a little too short. He shows up, does like one move, or has one of his priests do a move, and then the Gami monster is destroyed. So the Gami monster doesn't even lose in a battle; it just gets destroyed by Pharaoh, by Atem at the end. And I'm like, okay, all right, okay, that kind of works, but at the same time, like, I don't know, you've been doing all these duels, and that's been the whole thing, and you already ended in a draw with Kaiba and Yugi at this point. Like, you can't just have the Gami monster get beaten in a duel to end what might be the last Yu-Gi-Oh movie. Like, I just felt that was kind of anticlimactic a little bit. So that was something that kind of brought it down a little bit for me. But once, the Gami monster is destroyed, the threat to the world is stopped. Kaiba actually is resurrected along with everybody else was being dissolved by the evil of the Agami monster. And you have, this graduation scene with Yugi, and then you have Taya going off on her own on a plane to go be a dancer, somewhere else in the world. And Kaiba uses this invention that he created to essentially travel to another dimension or travel into the afterlife so he can challenge the Pharaoh to a duel in the Pharaoh's kingdom on the Pharaoh's turf. And that's the end of the movie. And I'm like, that is honestly really badass, by the way. And it kind of sucks you don't get to see that battle, but I get why you didn't really show that. But that's just another instance of blue balls. There's just too much blue balls going on with this script near the end. Uh, like, okay, you got the whole thing with the Agami monster and him not getting defeated in a duel, but like, do you double down on it with the whole thing with the Pharaoh and Kaiba at the end? But it's still such a cool, badass moment for Kaiba, though. I mean, he's such a total badass. He invents something that would enable him to travel through dimensions or travel to the afterlife or time just so he can duel somebody. And not just anybody, the Pharaoh. But yeah, I liked it. I thought it was actually pretty good. And out of all of the Yu-Gi-Oh movies, I would say this is the best. The best one, Dark Side of Dimensions. So just like with all the other Yu-Gi-Oh movies, I watched the English dub, so might as well share my thoughts on the dubbing real quick. It was great. I mean, Dan Green was once again really good as Yugi and Atem. Eric Stewart took a little bit to, warm up, but once he did, it was another solid performance by him as Saito Kaiba. Uh, Wayne Grayson did some good work as Joey Wheeler yet again. I liked, Amy Birnbaum as Taya, and Greg Abbey as Tristan. I liked Ted Lewis, who voiced Bakura. I liked, Kaiba. Kaiba's, yeah, I think it was his younger brother, Mokuba, voiced by Tara Sands. You have Diva Agami, who's voiced by Daniel J. Edwards. I thought he did an excellent job. Um, so yeah, overall, like it's a really good voice cast, at least for the English dub. And I like the editing by Aiko Nakagawa. I think it's honestly some of the best out of all of these movies. And just overall, I just thought it was a relatively dynamic and fun, epic animated film to watch. And even though I haven't watched the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monster series, that focus primarily on Yugi and his friends, I'm pretty sure if I had, I would still think this was a really wonderful send off to that series. And yeah, that's just my thoughts on the Yu-Gi-Oh movies. I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.